Welcome back, everybody, to our fourth and final session on essential Excel functions and shortcuts. Today, we're going to try and put together as many skills as possible into a case study format, where we're going to address typical business problems and we'll use Excel to solve them. For this exercise, you're going to need to use the latest version of the case study Excel file that I just sent you. And here's the situation. The Human Resources Department at your firm is trying to automate their time management system, particularly their overtime system. We're going to do this together because there's a lot of steps that we want to do, but we're going to follow along and see if we can automate these tasks and ensure that the payroll report is accurate and that the spreadsheet does some work for you. If there's something that's wrong, it's outside of the allowable limits, that the spreadsheet will tell you what's wrong so you don't have to catch it on your own. So all of this is going to be done in your Excel case study tab. So I'm going to switch my share, and that's where we're going. And there's a lot of red text here, so sorry about that. I just wanted to keep the formatting that we've done in the past. So here's this whole situation. There's lots of things to do, 8 different things. And here's our initial data here at the bottom. So let's just go right through it. Item number 1, we want to prevent unauthorized employees from being added to the system. So there's a simple safeguard being built in here that all employee ID numbers need to be 6 digits long, not any longer, not any shorter. So what we want to do is to go down to column D, and we want to format this data so that they only have no decimals, it's just actual numbers, and then we're going to use data validation to restrict the cells so that nothing else can be input there. So I'm going to go control down, it's going to take me down to the end of my data, and I keep going control down until I find the field I'm looking for, which is employee ID. And now I can do shift control down and I can highlight all the data in that column. So you can see there's some errors here. So first thing, let's format all of the data so it's the same thing. So I'm going to go Alt-H, it gets me to my home screen, and I want to format all of that. So I'm going to use FM, and that opens up my format box. If you know all the keystrokes, you can go further with keystrokes, but we're just going to stop there. I want these to be just normal numbers. I don't want commas, so I'm not going to click the comma box. I don't want decimal places. I'm going to set this down to be 2. So that should get all the numbers at least to be the same thing. Now that my numbers are all formatted properly, I want to validate the data. So I'm going to go to Data tab, Alt-A, V for my validation. And now I want to set up this field that only allows numbers that are 6 characters. So I'm using the settings format for that. There's a lot of choices here. We use list a lot, where we have done in a previous example where we set up a list of allowable inputs, but we're going to use whole number here. And I only want numbers that are 6 digits minimum or 6 digits maximum. That's it. So I'm going to okay that one. Now if I pick a random cell and try and put in a number, let's say 15, that's not going to work. Well, it gives me an error message that it doesn't work, but it really doesn't tell me what's wrong. So let's go back, highlight that whole cell, shift control down, and add to that data validation again. And I'm going to this time use an error alert. I'm going to say, let's see, employee ID number must be 6 characters. That's it. Okay. So let's go here again. If I try and put in 1 million, it's going to say, whoa, can't do it. And it tells me why not. Employee ID number must be 6 characters. Okay, that's much more helpful than just giving me an error message with no content. So now I know that my employee ID field is valid. So I'm going back up now. My next thing, number 2. Lines. So control down, control down, control down, control down. And I wanted to write this message in the overtime hours heading. So that's where I am. I put the little number 2 there so you can reference what we're trying to accomplish. And I want to put a comment field in there. So to put in a comment, Alt, again, to navigate, to activate my menu. R is my review function, and then C, I can put in a new comment. What do I want to say? Overtime hours above 20 must be authorized. Okay. I'm looking at my list of things to do. Insert a row just above the table. Add a properly formatted input field to indicate the threshold is 20 hours. Okay, so I want to go over here to this blank row. I'm using my mouse. Again, I have both my hands working at the same time, so I tend to use my mouse as much as my keystrokes. That's just me. Maximum overtime hours without authorization. Okay, so I have my description there, and I've run out of space here. So I'm going to have to widen some of these columns. So I'll just widen over here, and I'll widen over here. That way I've got a nice blank field there, and I'll put in my 20. Do I want $20? No, that is not what I want. So Alt gets me home again. Alt H, sorry, gets me home. I want to format that cell, which is FM, and I want it to be just a plain old number, no decimals. Okay. It's blue. That's good because it's an input cell. And let's see what else I'm supposed to do. Use conditional formatting, referencing the new input cell to highlight any employee who has worked over 20 overtime hours. So now I'm down here in this overtime hours. I do Control-Shift down to highlight that whole set of contiguous data. Now I need to do conditional formatting. I'm just going to pop up here with my mouse. I'm tired of my keys. Highlight cells rules. If it's greater than, and I can put a number in here. I could put 20, but that's going to be hard coding my data. And I don't want to do that. If I can use an input cell, that's always better. That way, maybe the maximum limit changes. Maybe it goes down to 10 or up to 30. So this way, you don't have to change your conditional formatting because it's always referencing the input cell. Now, the first thing here it says is to make anything that meets this criteria light red fill with dark red text. That's perfectly fine. I want to make it scary. There's other choices here, or you can do a custom format where you can pick your own colors and fonts and what have you. So I'm content with this one, so I'm going to leave it that way. I have several people who are over the 20-hour limit, and isn't this helpful? So now the spreadsheet's telling me that. I don't have to read every number and hope that I don't miss anything. So formatting can be really useful. Next thing, write a formula in column F to calculate the amount of overtime pay each employee earned. Okay, now remember between relative references and absolute references. If I want this input field to remain the same all the time, I want to put my dollar signs in there to make it absolute. If I want to be flexible, if I want the formula to reference whatever data is in a certain location, then I use relative. So in this case, all I'm doing is how many hours, overtime hours did they work, and what's the overtime pay? So it's the number of hours they worked times the overtime rate per hour. So does that need to be absolute reference, or is that a relative reference? Correct. It's an absolute reference. So I don't need both the cell and the row and the column. I really just need the row in this case. But if you want to be in a good habit, you can anchor both the row and the column if you like. Now, next question for you, is this supposed to be blue? No, it is not supposed to be blue because it's a simple formula. The formula will always give you the right answer. It's just a simple math. So I want to make that black is the right color. You can make it black here, or you can use automatic. I generally use automatic. I can use my autofill here because, again, it's next to a set of contiguous data, so it will fill just down to the level in the cell next to it. So do these numbers look right? 12 by 40, okay, 45 by 40, 18 by 40. Okay, looks like they're doing everything correctly. Okay, now I'm at number 4. Write an if statement in column H to warn the user if an employee's overtime needs to be authorized. And I've given you some hints of syntax. So here in column H, there's yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Well, you don't want a human to make that decision. A computer can do it. Anything the computer can do, the computer should do. So let's write our if statement. Equals if, open parentheses. And it's going to tell you what? If this number is greater than the authorized limit, which is 20. So I'm going to reference my input field that I put in there because it makes my spreadsheet more flexible. And this definitely has to be absolute. So I'm going to put a $sign in there for that row. If the overtime hours are greater than the limit, then the answer is yes, I do need authorization, and I put that in quotes. So I put a capital. If you want to put a text in a field, put it in quotes. Otherwise, say no, and put that in quotes. So remember the logic. If, then, else. If whatever's in this column is greater than this limit, then, comma, yes, I need authorization. Otherwise, which is represented by a comma, no. No authorization needed. So that formula looks fine. I've closed my paren and looks like it's working correctly. The overtime hours are only 12. They're not 20. So no authorization needed. Should this be blue? No, should not be blue. Alt-H, FC, if you want to use keystrokes, will get me back into my format menu, and I'm going to use automatic, change it black, and I can use autofill. I can also use Control-C and Shift-Control down, Control-V. Same answer, but autofill, of course, is way faster if you have contiguous data. So that's item 4. Item 5. The authorization date has to be in the past. It cannot be a future date. So first of all, format the today's date field in column I as a date, and then we're going to name the cell just for easy reference. So today's date, it's over here. It's in a Julian date. If you remember, the underlying data for any date in Excel is the Julian calendar, which starts at day 1, some hundreds of years ago, and then just counts the number of days since then. That way you can do math. So today's date, so Alt-Home again gets me to my regular menu. I can format, and then I want a date. Pick a date that you like. I think I'm going with just a straightforward kind of date. Okay, that'll work. If I wanted to change it to make it a custom format, I can pop back in my format menu, custom. Let's say I want it to have all 4 characters for the year. I'm just popping into that date function. I'm making it custom, put in an extra couple of Y's. So that says give me all 4 characters for the year. And I just click OK. And now it's going to give me my 2020. All right, so the date now is formatted. Use the settings and input message tabs in the data validation to restrict the cells so that only past dates can be input. Show a warning. So I'm using settings and the input data. So back over here. Whoa, didn't mean to go that far. Got my whole cell. Alt-A, VV, gets me back to data validation. Going to settings. So I don't allow anything. It's a date, and it has to be less than, I guess it could be less than or equal to, no, it's got to be less than. And I want to use my input field because that's, oh, I forgot to name it. That's a fixed point that I don't ever want to change. So there you go. Now, it's not giving me any messages here. So let's go back to my data validation. It's already here in my menu. Error alert. What do I want to say? Date, authorization date, and date must be in the past. Now let's make it must be prior to today's date. Okay. So I see some funky things over here. So let me look at this one. If it has 11/30, 2020. So that should not be allowed. It says, nah, you can't put that date in there. Authorization date must be prior to today's date. Okay, can I retry it? Let me do it again. 11/30/2019. No, yeah, that should work. Authorization date must be prior to today's date. Why is it doing that? Yeah, I didn't anchor my my reference thinking that the machine would do it for me, but that clearly didn't work. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go back to my data validation. I want to clear. Now I'll just change it. I'll just put my $ reference. I'm going to apply these settings to other cells. Yeah, it might work, it might not. Let's find out. 11/30/2019. Okay, now it's going to let me do that. Let's check why it's letting me do it now. I'm just going to look at it. It anchored that cell reference for me, so now we're fine. Okay, so again, if I try to type this one, 2020, it's not going to let me do it. It says, no, you can't do it. It has to be prior to today's date. Try again, and then I can go 11/30/2019, and it'll let me do it. These are input cells, so being blue is completely fine. Now I'm at number 6 to create a pivot table in column M. It's going to count the number of employees in each department and sum the overtime pay. Okay. I'll click over into pivot M, or column M. So when you're doing a pivot table, always leave your cursor where you want the table to end up. So make sure it's not on top of your data, because it'll just throw its output right on top of your data if you're not careful. So I put it in here in column. So to activate my menu, I'm going to go Alt-I to get my insert menu, and I want in the insert the pivot table, so I'm going to click on my pivot table here. What data am I summarizing? The data from my field here. Now remember, pivot tables do need to have a set of contiguous titles. Each heading has to have a unique word there. So I think we're okay as far as the format of our data. Okay, now it's going to say, what do you want to summarize? So we're summarizing data by department. So if I click on department, I'm going to drag it down here. You can usually click on it and it will go where it belongs. That's where I'm going to start with, department. What do I want to know? How many employees are there in each department? So I can drag that over here to values. And I would like to know how much overtime are they getting paid. So I'm going to take that also. So I have 2 things showing up. Sorry, my screen is really small here. I have 2 things, the employee ID and the overtime pay. Now I don't want the sum of the employee ID. I just want to count how many employees there are. So I'm clicking the down arrow. I go to value field settings, change it from sum to count. Okay, count how many employees are in each department, and then tell me the sum of the overtime pay in each department. Okay, useful stuff, right? And then it gives me my answer. Notice it does put these titles based on what you tried to do, and so sometimes your column widths are going to get kind of funky, and your table's not going to look very attractive. But at least I know HR has 6 employees, IT has 4, operations has 4, and here's how much money we're paying them in overtime. It's good information. Now the department managers can decide if that's too much or if it's okay. So that was number 6. We did a pivot table. And now number 7, we're going to create a client-friendly version of that same table. So I'm going to put it down below here. So let's make it pretty. Let me put some titles in here. Department. And then I want number of employees. And then I'm going to want overtime pay. So I'm going to make those headings a little bit more attractive. My departments, I could just say HR, IT, and what have you, but that's not very helpful to a user. It's going to jargony. So I'm going to put human resources. I'm going to put information technology, and I'm going to put operations. Just because if you're making a nice report, you usually don't use all those abbreviations. I'm going to put in some formatting. Let me see what I like. Alt Home FM. Oh, sorry, FC, wrong one. Alt H FC. I'm going to make it, yeah, black is fine, probably. I think I will fill it though. Let's fill it with this nice golden color. Let's make it bold. You can do just Control B, and I'm just up here on my menu, so I'm going to keep using my mouse. So that's nice. Maybe I'll make the rest of the, yeah, that's fine. Okay, now I'm going to write my COUNTIF formula to get the same information I got in my pivot table. COUNTIF. All right, what's my range? My range is over here. I'm trying to find out how many employees are in each department. So I'm going to just highlight those. What do I want to know? I put a comma. Are any of them in HR? Close my parentheses. And oh, it's sorry, I had needed to add an extra close an extra parentheses. That's because I had accidentally put in one at the beginning, which we don't need. Now I can't really copy that one down all that easily unless I first of all anchor the range. So I'm going into my function here, my formula window, so I can at least make that one anchored, and now I should be able to copy it down. And sure enough, it's going to go from M33 up here. I didn't anchor that reference, so now on the next one it's M34, which is fine. So that's working fine, but I want my range to remain the same. Okay, looking good. Next one is the sum. So I'm going to do a sum if equals sum if open parentheses. Okay, what's my range? What's my criterion? What am I going to sum? So the same thing. My range is if any of these people are in these departments. In this case, again, I'm going to start with HR. And what do I want to sum? I want to sum the overtime pay, so I'm going to highlight over here. And that should take care of it. Now, remember, we got to anchor some stuff. So you can use your F4 key. We've talked about that before. F4 function key, mine does not work very well, so I'm anchoring it by hand. And here's my other range. So I need the range for the department, and I also need the range for whatever it is I want to add up, which is the overtime pay. I'm not anchoring this reference because I want to change it as I copy my formula. So looks like the same number, and I can drag it down, and it's still looking pretty good. So besides the width of the columns being a bit too much, I mean, I can go ahead and drag them because I'm not going to share my pivot table with anybody because it's not attractive enough. So I can go ahead and at least make them a little bit smaller. I might want to center those as well because there's a lot of white space. And the other thing I probably want to do is to change these to be currency, right? Just so I get that dollar sign. I don't want to put any zeros so that it looks a little bit more. Now I want to add to the bottom of this table a sum. So Alt equals will sum whatever contiguous information is above me. So that's nice. It's not formatted very well yet. Whoops. So you can do a couple of things. I'm just going to do my format painter right now. We haven't used that before, but why not? And now I also want to make it stand out a little bit. So first I can do Control B, it's bold, that's nice. I can also, again, I can go up to my menu if I want to and do a special underline. So Alt H for my home menu, B is over here for my underlines. These are not actually underlines, I should say formats. And I want the one that has the thin border above and the double one below. This one right there. That's a typical accounting sort of sum. Now I want the same kind of thing over here. I'm going to do a Control C, Control V. Now it's not giving me the same number. Why? Because my initial range was way smaller than what's in that table. So I can just do Alt equals again, and it's going to Alt equals. Alt plus equals, not Alt and equals. And it's going to take that whole contiguous range of data. And now I have the same number and it is formatted the same. Okay, nice. So I can take this table, I can copy and paste it, give it to the boss, I can do whatever I need to. It looks way better than the pivot table itself. Write an if statement to confirm the sum in your table matches the original data, or warn if it does not. Okay. So if there's something wrong with my COUNTIF or my SUMIF, I may get bad information. So let's double check that my overtime pay is correct. So I can put equals if, open paren, this cell equals that cell. Great. Then don't do anything. Double quote, double quote. Otherwise, let me say something. Check formula. Let's see how much. Total doesn't match. Check formulas. And I close my paren. And it doesn't say anything at all unless something bad happens. So let's say that I get my range messed up and I'm only looking through F40. I shouldn't get the right number of totals. It did work that time. Okay. I didn't have the right range, so it didn't work. So now I don't match. And now my message comes up, total doesn't match, check. It didn't. I was formatted for center, and so the whole text didn't show up. Check formulas. Okay. I might want to make that a little bit more outstanding. Maybe I make it italics, Control I, and perhaps I want to make it a color and make it a nice red color so it will just stand out and remind me that I need to check something. Let's see. Color code the figures in your table, indicating the information is coming from another source. So that would be green in this case. So pick a nice green. So if there is a problem here, it should be because there's a problem in my data. Now, I've been messing with this just a little bit, so it's probably not really supposed to be green, but we're just going to do that to remind you. If you are pulling in data from another location, you want to color code it green so people know that it's coming from someplace else. So a summary of how you can put together a report that helps work itself instead of having the user to do all the work. So just to refresh, we had to make all of these employee IDs formatted the same so that the computer could work with them properly, and they're also easier to read. Then once we had that, we could validate them. So if I did put in a number that's not correct, like 42 or 45 or something, it's going to say, no, that's not going to work. You have to try again. Or I can just cancel it and have it go back the way it was. I have distinct parameters, and I can insist that my user follow those parameters. Very helpful if you're sharing your spreadsheet. I know that I have a certain number of overtime hours that are okay. Anything over 20 is going to be flagged. So I put in some conditional formatting using a reference cell. Instead of putting it directly into my formatting, I can always reference the cell. So if I look at my conditional formatting and manage rules, I can see what that rule says. If the cell I'm clicking on is greater than the reference cell, which is over here, then make that cell red. If it doesn't meet that criteria, it's just going to move on. I did a simple calculation, but again, I could use my reference cell. So I'm using this overtime rate per hour. What if the overtime rate goes up? No problem. Change it to $42 an hour. My data automatically changes. It's really important to use input cells as much as you can instead of putting hard-coded numbers inside formulas. Got all of that. I put in an if statement here. If this figure is above the threshold, say authorization is needed, yes. Otherwise, no. Okay. So once I anchored my reference cell, I could copy and paste this using my autofill down here, and there you go. We did also some validation, some kind of limiting what the dates are, and we did a pivot table, remembering that you want to put your cursor where you want that table to end up, make sure there's room for it. And then your data has to have these contiguous headings, and they all have to be unique, independent, different. And then it can do the summing or whatever you want it to do, and then we put together a nice table. So I think you've got it. So you have now done everything there is to do in Excel. No, not really. There's a lot more to do in Excel. But as I said before, it's about muscle memory. It's about practicing and practicing until you get it right. There's really no other way to do it. So congratulations, you have learned a ton about Excel. You hopefully are more efficient than you were when you started, and that's all you need to be. One step at a time, you will eventually get there. As I said earlier, it's about becoming as efficient as possible so that you can benefit your team can benefit your department benefits your organization, and those are the people then that get promoted. So that's our goal. Thanks very much, and practice, practice, practice.